Hello, Dave here, and I'm going to talk to you about religion, personality, and philosophy. Oh, and gender and death and the killing of your parents. So let's start with Freud. Freud's book Totem and Taboo. What is this, 1912, 1918, around that time? One of his great works on religion and human history. And it's basically an attempt to do sort of an anthropology of early human customs. It's very bold in terms of its theorizing of how human cultures and taboos and mores at this sort of deep level, how they emerged in human history. And he in there proposes, among other things, a certain vision of human prehistory whereby there was a primal horde who committed a primal parricide. So he assumes that early humans lived in a sort of alpha male dominated, violent, brutal, ape-like communal state. Darwin expressed something like this. Others in the 19th century, it was fairly common to imagine early human history as this. That actually drew on Hobbes in philosophy from centuries before, in this idea that human nature, in nature, humans' lives are nasty, brutish, and short. So the imagining of prehistoric humans was done along those lines for Freud as well. And characteristic of that early human society for Freud was also the father, the primal father, this the dominating, hyper masculine father figure who keeps all the sons and brothers and cousins in check, and who is sort of literally like the giver of the law, and represents this father authority figure, but literally imagined as the sort of alpha, the silverback of this ape-like tribe who's male-dominated and patriarchal. And there are women around, but Freud focuses in this narrative entirely on the agency of the males in the group. But what happens is all the brothers decide that they've lived under the tyranny of the father for too long, and they want to take things into their own hands. So what they do is they band together and they get an idea. They say, we're going to take out the father. So one of them could not destroy the father themselves. The father's too strong, but joined together, a whole band of brothers can take on that father. So that's what they did. They destroyed the father, and then they had a sort of society among equals. They killed their father, and they also ate his body. That's also an important part. So in consuming his flesh, Freud speculates had something to do with their taking that authority into themselves. And so what does all this mean? Freud thinks that was the beginning of culture, society, and this is his account in this book, at least. In other books, he has slightly different versions of this, and the account develops. But the birth of culture, society, and religion. Also gender roles, also human accounting for one another in a social formation, and what it means to think about authority and being haunted by this primal parasite act. And essentially for Freud, religion and the formation of personality in religion is a matter of being haunted by this primal act and feeling a certain guilt for having done so, but also identifying with the father. And totems, the erecting of totems and sort of symbolic vocabulary, and you can think about like Trump's Tower or something. It's like literally we invest these totems of highness with masculine authority in our world today. So it is more general than religion, but Freud also thinks that God, the concept of God, even in monotheistic Western religions, came out of this primal, perhaps a sort of generations-long memory, a distant memory of this primal parasital act, and God, and feeling guilty in relationship to God, and having consciousness of God, but kind of always fearing that God might be there and might return, and that sort of element in religion and how we form our individual identities, Freud connects back to this early prehistoric example. All right, so let's jump ahead now, talk a little bit more about this personality, prehistory, religion, philosophy, connection, gender, and spring to Simone de Beauvoir, who is a French phenomenological philosopher in the early to mid 20th century, was quite heavily influenced by Freud, but departed from Freud in a number of ways in accounting for these issues. And while Beauvoir does have a certain critique of religion, similarly to Totem and Taboo, and understands religion in naturalistic terms like Freud did, and like Nietzsche and others in the late 19th and early 20th century did, Beauvoir also focuses, especially in this text, on how the whole arc of human history and civilization and culture, in particular in the West, but she really does have a global, species-wide picture in mind here, how for humans as a whole, gender relationships and the relationship between the sexes, the first sex, males, and the second sex, females, and the establishment of that firstness and secondness, how all that transpires across human history. So like Freud, Beauvoir also thinks that prehistory is part of the story and is part of like a key to the mystery of how all this gets started. So Freud thinks about this primal horde. Beauvoir also imagines a primal horde in prehistoric times, living a more primitive existence for Beauvoir, primitive in quotation marks. For Beauvoir, that means a sort of hunter-gatherers, cave peoples of Europe, perhaps. I mean, all the famous caves with their cave paintings from the Neolithic in Spain and France were found, I believe, in Beauvoir's lifetime, and she was aware of them. Freud imagines, again, these like proto-human ape-like creatures who aren't wearing clothes and who are kind of grunting, like in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So there's a little bit of a disconnect between them, but they both go back to prehistory and what was happening then with the primal horde, and thinking about religion and culture and all that flows from that. So Beauvoir would have been critical of Freud's picture, mainly because it leaves out this whole question of sex and gender. And what does Beauvoir say about that? So Beauvoir imagines that in this primal horde, young men and men of all kinds are hunting, and there's reasons why they are the ones who go out to hunt, primarily biological reasons. She describes this all early in the book, in the section called History. Women, due to child rearing and other conditions, are more domestic in these early kind of cave-like settings, and the men are out hunting and being active in the world. And that in that state, and this is sort of in the transition to humanity out of animality, there is a break that happens whereby those men who are out there hunting and conversing with one another and exploring the world, they achieve a sort of transcendence of their animality and a sort of freedom through their acting actively in the world together that the female is denied. And there is established in that a certain dynamic, not for Beauvoir here, this isn't a natural dynamic in the sense that it didn't have to be this way. It's that primal situation, certain decisions were made, you could say, or structures were established, just like with Freud, whereby humans from then on were almost, predestined to act in a certain way, or it was in the genetic makeup of the species. That sounds weird, or in the collective memory. This is where it's all speculative prehistory, and in contemporary anthropology and archaeology, turning back to prehistory in this sort of way is frowned upon. I mean, it's speculative, it's philosophical. So you have to understand, if you take it with a grain of salt, you can see what both of them are doing here, and that they are philosophizing and theorizing about that past to reflect on how the present was constructed out of that past. So again, to return to Beauvoir here, then we have these primal hordes and the separation. There's like a gendered division of labor and a different concept of activity and passivity, and of freedom and unfreedom, and even of identity and personality, and what it means to be a full human being, and how being human and risking your life in these hunting expeditions is a certain social achievement that's recognized by others. Beauvoir famously in this text says that one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. And also by extension, one is not born a man, but becomes a man. And she means by that that to be a man or a woman is something that is achieved in a human lifetime and in human society. It's one isn't born this way, which is to say that for both, as again with Freud, nature brings us to a certain point, and then there's a break, and after that break, we have culture, we have society, we have religion, and in both those cases, we have gender roles and sexuality and identity and personhood and personality all built up in weird and interesting ways. So I hope you enjoyed this look at these two texts around the questions of religion, identity, and all that. So, all right, take care, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye.